Freddy vs. Jason, the novelization by Stephan. Chapter 14. Freeburg had sunk all the hypnosil, and was now searching through a drug cabinet in the patient room. He had seen or heard nothing of Stubbs's fight with Jason in the adjoining room. That's because Freeburg was fast asleep, giving Freddy the power to channel himself through Freeburg's dreaming mind into Freeburg's sleeping body. And about fucking time! Freddy had thought he'd had everything worked out. It had all seemed so easy.
Get Jason, send him to Springwood, get him to kill some brats, make the kids afraid, give the kids nightmares that would open their minds to me, grow strong from the kids' fear. Then kill the little bastards in their nightmares and feed off of their fucked up little souls.
All Freddy had needed was enough fear until he became powerful enough to carry on business as usual. Sure, the townspeople thought they'd been so clever. Get the last remaining kids who were open to Freddy, kids who were still having nightmares, and give them hypnosil. Round up the little fools, imprison them in this asylum, then kill their dreams with drugs. They'd shut the door on Freddy. If the kids had stopped having nightmares, he couldn't get at them. Then they couldn't spread their fear to other kids, so that they'd have nightmares, and so on and so on. The people of Springwood had quarantined Freddy, which is why he brought Jason back, to open that door, to break free of the interdiction. All Freddy needed was someone to start killing the kids of Elm Street again, then everything else would follow. Once kids started dying in their sleep, they'd start digging up the past, and they'd find out about Freddy Krueger. Who else could it be? Surely there couldn't be two invincible maniacs stalking Springwood with almost supernatural evil. It had to be Freddy. It had to be.
Wrong! It was Jason. Fucking Jason! Only the stupid fucking retard didn't know when to stop!
Jason should have called it a day the moment Freddy grew strong again, but
no! The moron Voorhees wouldn't stop killing. He killed that Gib bitch when she was exactly where I wanted her. She would have been the first. She would have been my homecoming. The first one to perish in her dreams and die in real life. But Voorhees went and fucking offed her. Now he was trying to kill all of them. He was taking them away from me. He was taking their souls away from me. He was unwittingly pushing me back into the darkness.
Freddy had thought he could control Jason, but he knew now to his cost that he couldn't. He'd fooled Jason into going to Elm Street, but then everything had spun out of Freddy's razored hands. Jason had begun a killing spree, and like so many other people before him, Freddy had realized too late that Jason Voorhees was unstoppable. The only way Freddy could get to Jason now would be in Jason's dreams. If Freddy somehow materialized in the real world, say, if Freddy attacked Jason now with Freeburg's body, Freddy would be finished in seconds. Jason was way too powerful in the real world, which is why Freddy didn't give a hot flying fuck who was being fried in the monitoring room. Freddy was master of the dream world, but his plan for Jason Voorhees had floundered. If he could dispose of the killer, he could then return to the far more pleasurable task of killing more kids and sucking strength from their souls.
Trouble is, right now, I can't get Voorhees to go to sleep. The maniac never sleeps.
Freddy could feel this one that they called Freeburg fighting to regain control of his body. Perversely, what had made Freeburg so easy to possess now made Freeburg difficult to control. The teenager's brain had been scrambled by years of drug abuse, making it hard for Freddy to retain much command of any of Freeburg's basic motor functions. The guy's brain wasn't like any other brain Freddy had ever entered. Controlling Freeburg was like trying to hold on to each and every strand of a bowl of moist spaghetti. Freddy felt Freeburg's right arm begin to shake. Independence. But a wave of red and green hands rippled down from Freeburg's shoulder to his hand, and Freddy was in control again. But for how long? Freeburg opened another drawer in the cabinet and found what Freddy was looking for. Tranquilizers. Freddy Freeburg began to sing a quiet lullaby. Then he picked up a bottle of thin pink liquid. A label on the bottle read, "Concentrate. Dilute. 1,000 to 1.
Dilute my ass.
Freddy grabbed hold of the 2 biggest syringes he could find, then filled them with the pure tranquilizer concentrate. Proud of his handiwork, Freddy held the syringes aloft, 1 in each hand.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, Jason.
The other teenagers were out of breath when they reached the patient room. They'd followed the sound of Linderman's screams and run as fast as they could. They were pretty sure that the screams came from somewhere around here. Kia waited in the hallway while Laurie and Will re-entered the ghoulish psychiatric ward with its rows of sleeping bodies. Freeburg was nowhere to be seen, but something had changed since Will and Laurie were last here. There was a pile of empty pill bottles lying scattered around the lab sink. Will hurried over and picked up a couple of the bottles. Hypnosil. Shit! They're all empty! He snarled, but Laurie didn't respond to his setback. Will turned to look at her. She stood still, dumbstruck, gazing off somewhere to the side. Will followed her stare. She was looking at the window leading to the adjacent monitoring room. Will jumped. He could see a body, a smoldering body, but who? Almost as if she were in a trance, Laurie walked across the room and took a closer look through the window. Will waited in silence. The bodies lay quiet and still on their slabs. Closer, in the red glow of the emergency lighting, Laurie stepped towards the... Stubbs's charred body came hurtling through the glass with an enormous crash, sending shards and splinters of the large window pane in all directions. Laurie screamed and ran back in horror. Stubbs's body had been hurled clear through the window and had landed on the patient room floor in a springwood fried heap. Stubbs had been thrown. Will looked up, and there, standing right up against the shattered window frame, was Jason Voorhees. Laurie and Will ran for their lives. They bolted out through the patient room door and rushed straight past Kia, who knew better than to waste time asking dumb questions. She'd heard the glass break. She'd heard Laurie scream, so she shut her mouth and ran too, straight into Linderman. All 4 of them cried out at this abrupt and unexpected meeting at the junction of 4 hallways. Linderman still had Stubbs's revolver, but he was holding it awkwardly, and Will had to wonder who posed more of a threat to him, Jason Voorhees or Linderman with a loaded gun. "Deputy Stubbs," Linderman was hyperventilating. He... We know, bustled Will. "Let's go!" But Laurie held back for a moment. "Where's Freeburg?" she asked plaintively, but Linderman just shook his head and continued gasping for air like a fish out of water. They were standing at a crossroad of corridors. Will pretty much knew which way to go. If only the proper fucking lights were on. This red crap was giving him a headache. Right, time to move. Will led the others round the corner into one of the 4 corridors, where they saw Jason ahead of them. Jason was clambering out of the monitoring room. There were faint wisps of smoke coming from his massive form, and his machete still glowed with the heat from the electric console. The hockey mask flicked sideways. They could see his eyes, which meant that he had seen them. "Real good choice, Will." They ran back to the crossroad and turned down another hallway, where they met Freeburg. Freeburg? He looked seriously strange. He was just standing there in the middle of the hall, his hands hidden behind his back, and his eyes looked more glazed than normal, if that was possible. Freeburg?" asked Laurie, looking for some sign of normality in the guy. Footsteps behind them. Jason Voorhees. The machete-wielding maniac had followed them, so now they were piggies in the middle, with Freeburg on one side and Jason on the other. A no-brainer. They ran up to Freeburg. He might be on a drug trip of Olympic gold medal proportions, but at least he was on their side. Jason came after them, striding, resolute, machete in hand. When the kids reached Freeburg, they carried on running, but Freeburg didn't budge. He just stood there watching the approaching leviathan of gore that was Jason Voorhees. Kia tried to grab onto him. "Freeburg!" shouted Kia. What the fuck was he doing? "Come on! He'll kill you!"
"Let me handle this, bitch!"
he said in a voice that did not sound of his own. Further down the corridor now, the gang stopped and called back, begging Freeburg to come with them, screaming for him to run. It wasn't like Freeburg to give himself up in a noble act of sacrifice. Besides, there was no need for anyone to sacrifice themselves. They weren't cornered. It's as if he wasn't himself. They didn't need someone to buy time for them. All they had to do was run for their fucking lives. "The hell is he doing?" barked Will. He didn't understand. None of them did. Jason had reached Freeburg now. "Just run!" He raised the red-hot machete, ready to hack Freeburg straight across the chest. Why isn't he running? Freeburg revealed the 2 giant syringes from behind his back, dived forward, and buried the needles deep into Jason's neck. "Come to Freddy!" gloated Krueger as he pushed the plungers, slamming the pure, undiluted tranquilizer into Jason's knotted veins. But no drug works that instantly. Jason blindly lashed out with the machete, using all of his might. He felt the blade connect with human flesh, a feeling he knew well, but wasn't sure where the blow had landed. "Freeburg!" Lori cried. In the dull red glow of the emergency lighting, it was difficult to see just what had happened. Jason and Freeburg seemed to be on pause. They just stood there facing each other. But the machete, Jason couldn't have missed. As the 4 friends looked on, the top half of Freeburg's body toppled forward, separating itself from the bottom half of the body, then fell to the ground with the heavy, sodden sound of tenderized offal. Jason had hacked Freeburg in 2, clean through the waist. For a moment, Freeburg's legs just stood there, braced, glistening red in a clear, flat, anatomical midsection, slicing of organs, muscle, and bone. Then they too collapsed onto the ground, knocking Freeburg's trunk aside. Jason stood over Freeburg's halves, towering, motionless, triumphant. Lori couldn't help but watch. Somewhere at the back of her devastated mind, she knew she should run. But there was something utterly magnetic about this bizarre tableau, the sudden stillness. What she didn't know was that Jason was quietly reeling under the attack of the tranquilizer. The impossibly powerful sedative was coursing through his veins, subduing him, numbing him. He tried to fight it, tried to resist. Jason fell backwards, his body straight, his back slamming into the ground. He just lay there, the remains of Freeburg lying by his vast feet. Silence. It was Linderman who broke the magic of the moment. "Fuck me!" Chapter 15. Jason didn't sleep. He never slept. When they hacked him to death with his own machete, he was awake. When they chained him to the bottom of a lake, he was awake. When they put him in a grave at Eternal Peace Cemetery, he was awake. Even when they dropped the torn pieces of his body in a drip tray in the federal morgue at Youngstown, Jason was awake. And even when Jason had been dragged down to hell, he'd been awake. His eyes flicked open inside the holes of the hockey mask. He had been asleep, but where was he now? Jason sat upright, his arms hanging by his sides as he raised his back into the vertical position. Where was he? He stood up. Pipes, steam, valves, ducts, catwalks, hollow metal stairs, and a furnace. A boiler room. "I'm very disappointed in you, Jason." Who was that? A woman's voice, familiar. Jason looked but could see no one. "You disobeyed me!" That voice again. "You were supposed to come back home. Just kill a few of them." There, a figure stepped out of the shadows on the iron walkway in front of him. He knew her, and she looked upset. It was Mommy, Pamela Voorhees. She had brought him back. She had raised him from the grave, but he had not disobeyed her. He had done as she'd commanded. He'd found the teenagers and made them pay. They'd paid for the death of his mommy. They'd paid for letting him drown in the lake. They'd paid. But now, this place. Had his mother rescued him? How else did he get here? Pamela Voorhees walked slowly forwards. Now she sounded angry with her boy. "But I blame myself. I should have known you wouldn't be able to stop killing. You're like a big stupid dog that can't stop eating.
Even when your master said you've had enough.
She came closer. Something was wrong. Her voice was changing. Jason raised his machete uncertainly.
But now,
her voice grew even deeper, more hoarse and guttural.
It's time to put the doggy to sleep. For good.
Suddenly, Pamela's face contorted into rage, and she screeched and charged forward, raising her right hand into a claw, as if she planned to scratch Jason's face. What was happening, Mommy? What? Jason was confused and made no attempt to move, not even when Pamela Voorhees started to change into Freddy Krueger right in front of Jason's sunken eyes. The clawed hand sprouted Krueger's blades, and Freddy reached out and dragged the 5 razors along the metal rail on the side of the catwalk. Sharp metal blades met with rusted piping, sending jagged golden sparks shooting out from the deadly fingertips. Now Jason understood. He saw Freddy Krueger. He had been used. Krueger had fooled him, had tricked him, had gone inside his mind. Krueger had fooled him, like they all did. They all tried to fool Jason. Jason Voorhees tightened his grip on the machete, his arms shaking with barely restrained rage. Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, both born in 1946, 2 harbingers of hate, sent hurtling down 2 different highways to hell, never once suspecting that their separate bloody routes were both headed for the same place. This conflict was something that had to be. It was inevitable. It was the moment the 7 layers of hell had long been waiting for. Freddy running crazily towards Jason with his razor claw of nightmarish doom. Jason standing waiting for Freddy, transmitting his undying rage through the long steady blade of the devastating machete. This was the ultimate fusion of evil, from which there could be only one winner. Only one of them would survive this test of ungodly mutilation. The other would be consigned to an eternity of vile torment. This is it. Arms flailing, Freddy hurled himself forward through the air, almost as if springing off a trampoline. The Raggedy Man howled with laughter as he raised his arms and legs ready to pounce on Jason. But Jason was ready. He lashed out with his machete and hacked Freddy's clawed arm clean off at the elbow. Freddy's severed half limb went tumbling over the edge of the catwalk and fell down into the depths of the boiler room below. The metal claws of his glove clattering distantly against the maze of iron pipes and boilers.
"Ah! My fucking arm!"
cried Krueger. Way below, his severed hand hit the ground. The claw fingers were still writhing, the razors slashing and twitching like the death throes of a cutthroat spider. Freddy fell back against the pipes, staring at his butchered arm in disbelief. Thwack! Jason struck again, his blow striking with deadly accuracy.
Oh!
Freddy's other arm fell away too, only this one had been hacked off at the shoulder. Freddy dropped to his knees screaming like a banshee, a double amputee with blood flowing into the sleeves of his already red and green sweater. Jason looked down as this Venus de Kruger knelt helpless and armless before him. But Jason had a lot to learn. Freddy was no stranger to dismemberment. In past nightmares he'd cut off his own fingers. Once he'd even torn off his own gloved arm and worn it as a seatbelt. He'd do anything to terrify his victims.
Oh yes, this dumb fuck Jason had a lot to learn.
This was the nightmare realm, and Freddy was its ruler. Krueger smiled back up at Jason, while 2 new arms quickly materialized out from the bloody sockets where Jason had done his damage. Freddy laughed and flexed his razor fingers. He clenched his other hand in a fist and shook it up and down at Jason, the big jerk-off. Unfazed or uncomprehending, Jason gripped the machete with both hands and swung it high over Freddy's head, ready to swing it slamming down on his kneeling victim. Freddy caught the descending blade between the closed palms of his hands, stopping the blow in mid-flight. That was impossible. They wrestled for control of the machete, Jason standing, Freddy on his knees. Jason tried to use brute force, but Freddy was too clever for him. Krueger twisted his gloved hand, catching the machete between 2 of his razor blades, flipping the machete up and away. The blade spun and twirled, edge over grip, flying through the hot, humid air before slamming point first into a steam pipe. Hot vapor hissed out through the puncture. Jason had no weapon, save for his brute strength. Freddy slammed an elbow hard into Jason's face with a sound like a sledgehammer breaking a paving slab, followed by another and another. Jason fell back step by step, his masked face slapped from side to side, until finally Freddy pulled back for the final punch to send Jason flying backwards through the air and crashing into a nest of piping. The meeting of Voorhees and labyrinthine plumbing resounded like the tolling of a death bell throughout the entire cavernous boiler room. Freddy looked down at the fallen figure.
"Welcome to my nightmare,"
he sneered. Jason was on Krueger's territory now. The brute staggered slowly, silently to his feet.
"Oh, back for more?"
Freddy cackled, then raised his deadly glove. A flick of a finger blade, and Jason was lifted off his feet by an invisible force and sent slamming into a wheel-shaped valve that protruded from the largest pipe behind them. Such pain! Jason tried again. Freddy waved his glove again. More pain. And again and again. Jason painfully stepped away from the wheel valve, only to be sent hurtling back into it, over and over. Krueger was toying with him. Jason was Freddy's puppet.
"Dance for me, bitch!"
Voorhees was thrown back into the valve one last time before slumping to the metal floor. The valve, the pipe, the whole system had been dented and crushed by the repeated impact of Jason's powerful body. But it wasn't over yet. A sly grin crossed Freddy Krueger's face. He looked over to Jason's machete, where it was still lodged in the hissing steam pipe. Freddy closed his eyes, concentrated. Voorhees was going nowhere. The machete began to vibrate, trying to obey Krueger's mental command. Suddenly it was free. The blade sliced through the air, flying forward at incredible speed, straight towards Jason. Freddy was going to kill Voorhees with his own weapon. Unaware of the impending blow, Jason slowly climbed to his feet and looked up. The eyes in the hockey mask went wide with realization. The machete wasn't more than a foot away. Jason reached out and grabbed it. He snatched the machete, caught it at the instant it was about to enter his chest. Only he wasn't holding the grip, he was holding the blade. Freddy laughed as the machete wriggled and shook in Jason's hand. The blade cut through Jason's black leather gloves and dug through Jason's rotted fingers to the bone. All the while, the machete was fighting to edge ever closer to Jason's chest. Time to bring this charade to an end. While Jason struggled with the lethal machete, Freddy looked around until he spied a steel plate lying nearby. He motioned with his knife-edge glove, and the plate responded by taking off. It flew up and whirled through the air towards Jason. With a bang, the plate struck the handle of the machete, hammering the weapon. Jason lost his grip. The machete blade cut deep into the deathless maniac's chest. It went straight through him and came out through the middle of his back, where it then pierced one of the pipes behind him. Jason was stuck, pinned to the pipe by his own machete. He had killed so many people this very same way, impaling victims with his machete, pinning them to trees, doors, window frames. Now he knew how it felt. Jason Voorhees struggled to break free, but the machete held him fast, scraping and slicing his innards with each move he made. Freddy gloated in victory. He strode casually over to Jason, raised his glove, then tapped Jason's hockey mask with one of his finger knives.
"Penny for your thoughts, Chief?" "Ha ha ha ha!"
He laughed. Jason suddenly twisted. He withdrew the machete with his left hand and turned the edge of the blade upwards. At the same time, he grabbed Freddy's head with his right hand and forced Freddy's neck down towards the blade. Jason had waited for this. He had waited for his attacker to get too close. Jason would decapitate Freddy. Krueger's snap-brim hat fell to the floor, and he snarled as his charred neck vanished. Jason whirled about. Where had he gone? Jason had held him. He was gonna kill him. Confused, the machete-wielding behemoth looked all around it, but it was dark, and there were too many pipes, too many shadows, too many hiding places. Jason was lifted off his feet by an unseen force. Not again! Freddy stood high on a balcony. He looked down on Jason hanging in space like a kid's toy. Krueger's head was bare, but he could remedy that. Freddy held his gloved hand up, keeping Jason suspended, but he extended his bare hand and pointed to the ground. His fedora shot up out of nowhere and slipped comfortably into his open hand. Freddy then flipped the hat with the fingers of his left hand, bounced it on his left elbow, then smiled as the hat flew up and landed neatly and perfectly on his head. He laughed with pleasure.
Back to business!
Freddy fixed Jason with his insipid, watery gray eyes. His eyes narrowed. A sick smile spread over his lips. He moved his gloved hand this way and that, weaving the 5 razors in pretty patterns through the air. And in turn, Jason moved this way and that, crashing 4 limbs with bone-shattering force through anything that stood in his way. Freddy moved his hand this way. Jason smashed his head against a pipe. Freddy moved his hand that way. Jason backslammed into a scalding boiler. Krueger laughed and scuttled quickly down an open metal stairwell. He wanted to get closer to the action. Now he was waving his hand frantically, and Jason was being slung every which way around the boiler room, spinning, crashing, rebounding like a ball on a pinball table. Jason could do nothing as his nemesis threw him into one pipe after another. Freddy could see the life being slowly pummeled out of this pathetic, dumb mommy's boy. Didn't Voorhees know that mothers were only good for fucking and killing? Jason's head hung limp as Freddy brought his body near, so that he could kick Voorhees and slice at him with his claw hand. Jason was seriously cut up. His neck was broken. He'd been burnt. He was beaten. Krueger then used all his power to lift Jason high into the air. For a moment, Jason simply dangled, suspended in space. Then Krueger snipped his glove aside, breaking the link and letting Jason fall. Bam! Jason hit the floor with gut-splattering impact. But Freddy wasn't done yet.
Oh no, not yet!
He knew that Voorhees was capable of anything. He knew that he had to kill Jason off once and for all. Now that Jason lay broken, Freddy got ready to administer his final blow of execution. Freddy tensed his body and braced himself in a Herculean effort of willpower. His whole body shook as he concentrated, summoned all his power, all his control in this nightmare domain, this dreamscape. Above, high above Jason's prone body hung a boiler, suspended by pipes and other rigging. But this wasn't just any boiler. It was massive. It was thick with jagged layers of rust. It spewed toxic fumes. Its surface was surely as hot as the Earth's molten core. It weighed over 10 tons. This was the mother of all boilers. The whole boiler room started to shake. The pipes rattled. A subsonic rumble of power vibrated the entire floor. And bam! One of the pipes connected to the mega boiler broke free, and another, and another. Soon the entirety of the huge tank had broken free of its connections, ripped from the heart of the boiler room by the might of Freddy's infernal willpower. The whole room was shaking now, as if in expectation of what was to come. Freddy looked up, saw the boiler suspended over Jason's beaten and broken body. Like some demented conductor, he raised his arms, then flung both hands downwards. Almost immediately, the great boiler tank obeyed Freddy's gesture and dropped through the air, before hitting the ground and exploding with colossal, grinding, demolishing force on Jason's helpless body. The boiler room reverberated with the deafening boom of iron on concrete. Gases and fire escaped out of the crashed boiler. Freddy had turned this place into heavy metal hell. It was over. Finished. There'd be no more plans ruined by this retard. Freddy leapt down to the wipeout zone and proudly surveyed the crushed mess that was Jason Voorhees. The dead maniac was almost hard to see beneath the blazing, broken mass of the fallen boiler. There! Freddy could see Jason's hand jutting out from beneath the wreckage. Jason's hand. Twitching. What did he have to do? Krueger roared with anger.
Why won't you die?
The next thing Krueger knew, Jason's twitching hand had reached out and clamped tight around Freddy's ankle. Freddy tried to break free, kicking, struggling, as Jason heaved the massive boiler up and away.
Impossible!
Just as Jason had underestimated Freddy's power in the dream world, Freddy had underestimated Jason's indomitable willpower in any world. Freddy also forgot what he himself, masquerading as Pamela, had told this psychopath. "Jason, my special, special boy, do you know what your gift is? No matter what they do to you, you cannot die. You can never die." This was true in the real world, and it sure as hell was true in this namby-pamby fucking dream world. Jason stood upright, still holding on to Freddy's ankle, and then, with a massive effort, he swung Freddy up into the air and threw the dream demon across the room and into a twist of harsh metal piping. The pipe split open immediately, releasing a flood of teeming water onto the concrete floor of the boiler room. The liquid coolant fell like a waterfall in front of Freddy and began to spread forward across the room, gushing in torrents from the pipes and flooding over towards Jason's feet. Jason recoiled. Freddy caught the scent of his emotion in an instant.
Fear in the eyes, inside that hockey mask.
Jason fixed his gaze on Freddy and wanted desperately to grab hold of him again. But each time Jason drew near to the torrents of water separating the two of them, he held back. Protected by the dirty, stinking liquid, Freddy grinned slyly.
"So you are afraid of something,"
he sneered. Another wave of the gloved hand. More pipes burst, releasing jets of water, waves filling the room, flooding Jason, surrounding Jason, trapping him, swirling around him. Soon Jason stood knee-deep in water, and still the level was rising. He looked left, he looked right. He reached out a hand ineffectually at the laughing Freddy Krueger. Chapter 16. They'd seen it for themselves, they'd felt it, they'd lived through it. But Lori and her friends still had trouble getting their heads around the idea that while someone might be fast asleep right in front of their eyes, that same person could be awake in Freddy Krueger's dream world, living, breathing, fighting, dying. They might even be in the same room in both worlds like Freeburg had been whenever he had spoken to the coma victims. In both reality and in his dreams, Freeburg had been in the Weston Hills patient room. It was too fucking much. Linderman sat on the floor of the speeding van. They'd fucked up the Hypnosil plan, so now they'd gone to Plan B. Well, they hadn't got a Plan B as such. In fact, they didn't have any plan at all. No, what they were doing now was taking care of pure opportunity. It was Lori who had come up with the idea. When Jason fell in the hospital corridor, the rest of them had just wanted to run, but she'd stopped them. She quickly put together some of the things Will had been saying, and she'd somehow guessed that Krueger had been in control of Freeburg, and that it was Krueger who'd put Jason to sleep. And if Krueger wanted someone to fall asleep, that could mean only one thing. Krueger wanted to kill them. So Krueger wanted Jason dead. But that alone didn't fully explain why the sleeping body of Jason Voorhees was now lying on the floor in the back of Will's van. Linderman was clutching 2 boxes of tranquilizers like his life depended on it. He looked over at Kia. She looked down at Jason's massive body. Jason lay between them. They'd tied him up in ropes, chains, tape, everything they could find before dragging the big heavy bastard out of the psychiatric hospital. Jason's white hockey mask glowed eerily under the funky lights. Up front, Lori was having to explain it all over again. Will couldn't understand why the guy they were most afraid of, the maniac who'd been trying to kill them, the serial freak who'd murdered most of their friends, was now lying sedated in the back of his van. Why didn't they just leave him at Weston, or kill him in his sleep, or set fire to the motherfucker and drive backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards over his blackened body with the van until there was nothing left but mud? "Why don't we just try and do it here?" Will was saying. "Why go all the way to Crystal Lake?" Lori was in the passenger seat. She had to convince Will. She had to keep them all together. The 4 of them were Elm Street's only chance. Freddy was attacking Jason right now inside of Jason's dreams. If Freddy won, They couldn't stop Freddy. Not these guys, not the police, not the quacks with their bottles of Hypnosil. You need a nightmare to kill a nightmare. Only Jason had the power to kill Freddy. But Jason couldn't kill Freddy inside of a dream. He had to do it for real, somehow. But then if Jason succeeded, how would he be stopped? When they'd been down in Freeburg's basement, Linderman had downloaded some files on the Voorhees case. On almost every occasion, Jason slayed at home. If he wasn't already at Crystal Lake, he went back to Crystal Lake soon as he could. So even if they couldn't kill Jason, they might be able to contain him. Take him back to Crystal Lake. Minimize the risk of fallout. Take him home. Best case scenario, Lori explained. We need to lure Freddy out, dream him up, and drag him into this world. Best place to do that is where Jason is strongest. If Jason wins, he'll be home, back where he belongs. Why follow us anymore? It will all be over. And if Freddy wins? Asked Will. Lori didn't answer, so he looked across at her. She had a grave expression on her face. Well, shrugged Will, knowing that no one had a better idea. At least Jason gets home field advantage. Jason was held fast by the water, the virtual fall gushing down around him. Freddy pushed forward, wading claw first through the torrent. But what? Jason, the hulking masked killer, was gone. In his place was a kid, just a kid, a boy, maybe around 11 years old, and he was huddled up against the wall shivering with fear. And yet the boy was wearing Jason's hockey mask, though only a pair of Camp Crystal Lake swim trunks covered his puny body. The boy was Jason. Little Jason was drenched. He whimpered and cowered away as Freddy reached a finger knife towards the little boy's face. Snick! Freddy cut the strap of the hockey mask. The mask fell and landed with a faint splash on the surface of the water, where it floated, empty, faceless. Immediately the boy turned away, hiding his face in the shadow.
Now isn't that sweet?
Mocked Freddy, a wicked smile twisting his burned face.
Buried in the heart of every strapping young serial killer is a scared, simpering little crybaby.
Freddy reached out and gripped the boy's chin. Then he slowly turned Jason's face into the light. Jason's skull was unnaturally pale, misshapen.
And his face?
Freddy recoiled.
Now there's a face only a mother could love,
he spat. Then he turned Jason's face to look across the boiler room. There, on an elevated walkway above the water, was the head of Jason's mother, impaled on a wooden stake, her head rotted and impaled. Little Jason cried out, terrified, and fought to break free.
Now we're getting somewhere, you ugly little turd,
snarled Freddy, violently shaking Jason's head. The boy struggled, but he could do nothing as Freddy raised his gloved hand, then suddenly plunged the blade bolted index finger of his murder glove deep into Jason's bald, deformed head. Blood spurted from the wound, and Jason shrieked, just a terrified little boy. But Freddy pushed deeper, digging and digging with the cruel razor blade until it had torn a hole deep into Jason's brain.
Let's dig a little deeper,
Freddy exhaled as he slowly traced the side of Jason's misshapen skull, probing ever deeper into the convolutions, the synapses, and down into the electrochemical vortex of Jason's memory.
Now we'll see what really scares you.
The electrical nerve impulse firing across Jason's mind became a bolt of lightning across a black sky over a shadowy, twisted landscape. There was something vaguely familiar about this place. Trees, a lake, Camp Crystal Lake. But this wasn't Crystal Lake as tourists knew it. This was the abhorrent bastard perversion of Crystal Lake that festered in Jason's rotted mind. The trees were made of corpses. The stones on the ground were fractured, shit-filthy skulls. The water on the lake was thick, warm blood. Everything about the place was laced with black desecration. This was Crystal Lake, as delineated by the lunatic on his final death march to the gallows. This was Crystal Lake, as seen through the pustulant eyes of a body at the bottom of a plague pit. This was Crystal Lake, as dragged screaming through the hatred and baby-fuck violation of a serial killer's mind. This was Camp Blood. This was Camp Death. An agonized shrieking tore through the darkness. It was a woman. She was being dragged screaming by her wrist. She was being dragged by Jason. Jason, as the tall, unstoppable maniac behind the hockey mask, not Jason the crybaby hydrophobe. Jason ignored his victim's cries as he pulled her along the desiccated earth behind him. He just pressed on, relentless, until finally coming to the wreckage of a house. The walls of the house had mostly fallen down, and the roof was gone. It was as if the house was a bombed-out shell on the front line of a battlefield. Only the door and some blackened wood around it remained in place. Jason could have taken any path to step inside the ruin of the house, but he made for the front door to open it, as if he couldn't see the demolished state the house was in. Jason flung open the door and threw the woman inside. She screamed once more, but who was there to hear her in this blighted dreamscape? Freddy Krueger stepped out from the shadows. He looked around.
Not bad. This kid's got some imagination.
Then he crept forward, ready to watch the next act in the Voorhees show. The guys had been driving for hours, the beams of the headlamps showing the way through mile after mile of dense forest. The original idea was that they'd take turns at the wheel, but one quick glance made it clear to Will that he alone was in fit condition to drive. Kia and Linderman were too freaked out, and Lori was surprisingly calm, but her mind was elsewhere. She was still working it all out, trying to think through all of her options. She was taking a major risk here, and all four of their lives depended on Lori coming up with the right answers. Linderman and Kia mostly passed the journey in silence, their two frightened faces fixed on one another, their minds racing, full of wordless stress. Jason twitched. Linderman was sure of it. His finger moved. Linderman grabbed a syringe and filled it with tranquilizer. Didn't you just give him one?" asked Kia. "Better safe than sorry." Linderman emptied the syringe into Jason's neck. There was no way Linderman was going to let this creature wake up while he was still in the van. No fucking way. Kia looked away and sighed. The sound of the engine rumbled beneath them. It had been a long drive. Linderman looked down at Jason, fast asleep. Then he looked at the floor, then his shoes, then Kia. She looked great. She also looked scared witless and more than a little vulnerable. Linderman felt bad. He felt sorry for Kia. He felt sorry for himself, for all of them. They were all caught up in this thing. He cleared his throat. Listen, Kia, I kind of wanted to apologize, for back at the party when I said all those things to you. She looked up at him. He was genuine. Don't worry about it, Linderman. I can be a bitch with a capital C, I know. Yeah. And I'm still attracted to you. What's up with that anyway? Kia smiled sweetly. Wow, Linderman, is that a spine I see growing in there? He laughed, and Jason's left arm shot up, straight into the air. They jumped and screamed in unison, and Jason's arm fell again. He was still, completely still. Lori spun in her seat and called around. "What's happening back there?" Linderman looked down at Jason. "Nightmares." Inside the old Voorhees residence, the walls and ceiling were intact. The place was whole. It had transformed in the space of one step through the front door. But the air was still. The decoration was staler yet. Everything was brown and old-fashioned. Brown wallpaper, brown paint, brown wooden furniture. The place was a museum of bygone taste. Light seeping through a Tiffany lampshade revealed that every surface in the room was covered with a fine layer of dust. Music drifted eerily from room to room. Muted, crackling bebop through an old wireless radio set. The music suggested the 1950s, but the decor came from a period maybe 20 years earlier. Jason dragged his victim across the floor. She'd stopped screaming because he'd killed her. He pulled her along the hallway carpet, over to the closet. Mutely, he opened the closet door, tossed the dead body inside, then slammed the door shut. Then Jason turned on his heels, moving slowly, surely, like a well-oiled automaton, before heading back down the hall, his measured strides taking him back out through the front door. He closed the door behind him and stalked off in search of his next victim. She looked exactly the same as the last. This was the bottom level of the Voorhees psyche, an unending routine of stalk and kill, stalk and kill, stalk and kill. Freddy emerged from his shadowy hiding place, then took a step towards the closet. He felt curious, excited. He pretty much knew everything there was to know about the dream world, but this excursion into Voorhees' mind had been a rare treat. A scream, distant from outside. Freddy shrugged. Another victim. Hi-ho. Then went on about his business. He reached out a hand to touch the handle of the closet door.
Oh, I'm dying to see what skeletons are hiding in your closet.
Krueger pulled on the handle and slung the door wide open. His eyes glinted with amusement. The other side of the door was filled with water. Water again. Almost as if there was a glass screen over the doorway, and Freddy was looking into a massive aquarium tank. But it wasn't an aquarium. Freddy could see dirt at the bottom and weeds and small fish. It was a lake, and that wasn't all Freddy could see. A bloated white corpse floated across the open doorway. Freddy sniggered, intrigued. Then he saw another body and another. Suddenly, Freddy realized he wasn't looking at fish at all. He was looking at dead bodies floating in the distance, hundreds of them, blanched corpses adrift in the lake, in what seemed like an infinite watery grave. A splashing sound caught Freddy's attention. He took a step closer to the closet doorway and looked up into the lake. He could see something up near the surface of the water. It was a young boy, splashing, fighting for his life, drowning. He understood. Krueger understood. The undead bastard grinned up at the drowning kid and jubilantly intoned,
Gotcha!
Linderman sank another tube of sleeping fluid into Jason's neck. He was getting worried, stabilizing himself by pressing an arm against the side of the van. He leaned forward and called, We're running seriously low on trank, guys. I've got enough for maybe one more dose, plus enough for Lori. Will shot Lori an angry glance. Damn, that crazy plan of hers. She didn't notice. Will looked back at Linderman. We're almost there. Then I better get going, said Lori resolutely. She turned in her seat, then clambered up and headed for the back of the vehicle. How do you even know this is going to work? Questioned Will. Last time I fell asleep, recalled Lori. I pulled part of Freddy out from my dream. This time, I'm just going to bring back all of him. But how are you going to find him? Will sounded doubtful. I won't have to. Whenever I close my eyes, he's always there. Will, he'll find me. Damn it, that crazy plan of hers. Will dabbed the brake and pulled over to the side of the road. Lori nearly fell, but continued to make her way back. Will grabbed her arm. I don't want you to go. Lori could see how much he really cared for her. There was 100% pure anguish in his eyes. I'm coming back, she said. Just give me 15 minutes, then wake me up. I'll bring that bastard back. You just make sure Jason's waiting for him. She raised her arm and set the alarm on her digital watch. 15 minutes. 1500. Will couldn't let her go. True, she was the only one who had a plan, and she was the only one who had any idea how to join up all the dots. They didn't know if she was right, but it was the best strategy they had right now. It made a kind of unbelievable sense. But why did she have to be the one who went and found Freddy? She had explained it to them, of course, how Freddy attacked his victims one by one. That's why none of them had seen Freddy in their dreams. They didn't know if Laurie had been the first to dream Freddy. They didn't know who'd killed Trey, Blake, or Gip. It could have been Jason, Freddy, or both of the messed up bastards. And if it hadn't have been for Mark's story about his brother and his brother's nightmares about Freddy, Will still might not have believed Laurie. But then he'd seen what had happened to Mark.
Freddy's back.
Yeah, well fuck you, Freddy. She was right. They had to fight this thing. Will sighed and drew her close. I'll make you a deal, he said. You make sure you come back, and I promise I'll never leave you again. Of all the shocks Laurie had experienced over the last few days, this was the most unexpected. She knew what Will meant, what he was saying. It took every bit of willpower she had not to burst into a flood of tears. She was already tired and emotional. But this, Will, he pulled her close and they kissed. The kiss was pure, passionate. It was a single pure kiss, blessed with love. Moments later, all four of them were in the back of the van. 5 if you included the sleeping meat grinder that was Jason Voorhees. Linderman checked the syringe for air bubbles, tapping like he'd seen them do on TV, then gently pricked Laurie in the arm. He was nervous, but tried his best not to shake. He had no experience of this stuff. Laurie watched Linderman withdraw the needle. The tranquilizer had entered her veins. She looked at Kia, she looked at Will. Then she lay down beside the chained and bound bulk of Jason Voorhees. Now I lay me down to sleep, she said quietly. This was too much for Will. He hurried back up front and started up the van again. As the van crawled back up onto the road, Jason's head shook in time with the suspension. Inside the mask, his eyes were closed, but his eyelids were twitching. He was in REM sleep. He was still dreaming. Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 14, 15, and 16 of Freddy vs. Jason. We're getting pretty close to the ending here, and after what I read tonight, I can only imagine how awesome the final fight's going to be between Freddy and Jason at Crystal Lake in the book. Because, wow, my expectations as I went along in this book got a little bit lower and lower for the dream fight that they were going to have. But man, what a wicked fight they actually had. And I hope the music I picked worked for you because it kept going back and forth. First and foremost, though, I really enjoyed the scene just like I did whenever it was in the movie at the clinic, at the institution, when Freeberg, possessed by Freddy, jabs that trank into Jason. They're trying to get him to go, and he's like, "Let me handle this, bitch." I just love it. I was hoping the book would explain more about how they got Jason into the back of the van without more security coming after him. I mean, I know the head security guy got killed, but you'd think a big old hospital like Weston Hills would have more than one security guard for the whole place. But I guess that would ruin the flow if it stopped and explained how they got his giant dead ass into the back of the van without anybody else investigating what's going on. But and they left, and they're on their way to Crystal Lake. It doesn't really explain how they went from Springwood to Crystal Lake. It did say they're driving for hours, so there's that, I guess. I love the back and forth with the characters. I'm really caring for the characters more in the book than I do in the movie, and that really makes for a better read. So I can really feel Will's pain knowing that Laurie's he just got Laurie back, and she's going into this dream world to face Freddy, and he could lose her. And if he doesn't lose her there, they could all get killed whenever she pulls Freddy out of the dream world and Jason's woke up. But they didn't ask for the fight, but they're right there in the middle of it, and at least the logic is explained in the book here. Okay, if we leave town, Freddy's already in our minds. We're already infected with Freddy. So it's like they got to do what they got to do. Hope that Jason kills Freddy, and hope that Jason will stay at Crystal Lake once they leave. So really, being shit out of plans, that's the best plan they could come up with. It actually makes sense. As far as the fight scene and Jason converting to a scared child and everything, I really enjoyed the book version more than the movie version of this scene. It was so vivid, so well written, the imagery was amazing, and the fight just seemed more back and forth than it did, and less goofy than it did in the movie, there in Freddy's Dreamscape in the boiler room. And I just loved, Jason thinking he had the upper hand, then Freddy thinking he had the upper hand, and then Jason taking it back. I'm not a big fan of the whole Jason scared of water thing, but I'm gonna look at it as it's the fear of him drowning plus Freddy getting into his head. Because before this, Jason thought he was untouchable. So if anything's going to give Jason a bit of insecurity, it's going to be that he's in this dream and everything he threw at Freddy wasn't enough and Freddy's still getting him. And it's like Jason felt a little bit of that pain that he causes others and felt that he might not be as strong as he thought he was, in this instinct he has, this animal instinct. So maybe that caused some insecurity that led to the maybe a underlying insecurity about drowning in the water, and that's how Freddy was able to manipulate Jason into converting him to like a scared little boy. And then Freddy gets into Jason's head, and again, great writing by Stephan Hand, great imagery. It's really, instead of like in the movie where it's us seeing in Jason's psyche, it was so cool for it to be, it's like Freddy's got a front row seat at a movie theater, just watching what's inside Jason's deepest inner thoughts. And it really felt like the writer took us there. It was real eerie. I hope I picked some good music for that to keep it eerie, some classic Friday the 13th creepy sounding music there, some slower stuff. And, we're almost to that big fight, and I'm really excited about that. I'll be back very soon with more of this book. We've only got a few chapters left. It's been a wild ride. Thank you all for taking this ride with me. Hope you're enjoying the book so far. Hope you enjoyed tonight's 3 chapters. Let me know in the comment section below, and I will see you soon. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and
Let me handle this, bitch! Pleasant dreams!
Hi, this is Jeffrey Reddick, creator of Final Destination.
Greetings, Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror books, the Bard's Blood horror Shakespeare books.
Hey guys, this is Jason Brooks, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th Vengeance.
Hey, this is Slasher Pepper.
Hey everybody, it's CJ Graham, Jason, Friday the 13th Part 6.
This is William Pattison, known to Friday the 13th fans as Eric Morris.
Hi, this is Deborah Voorhees from Friday the 13th Part 5.
Hey folks, this is Adam Marcus, director of Jason Goes to Hell and Secret Santa.
Hello kiddies, this is John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Hi, this is Kane Hodder, better known as Jason from Friday the 13th, Victor Crowley from Hatchet.
And you are listening.
You're listening.
And you're listening.
And you're listening.
I just want to make sure you guys know you're listening.
You are listening.
And you are listening.
And you are lucky enough to be listening.
Okay, boils and ghouls, you are listening.
You are listening
to the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
The 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian.
To the 80s Slasher Librarian. Keep listening, or I'll kill you.